Good evening and welcome to this very special edition of the NewsHour Agenda that we're bringing to you live from the White House in Washington, D.C. You can see the entire city has been transformed into a winter wonderland, and the Prime Minister is, of course, expected to land here at around 5 in the evening local time. But it's tomorrow when the real business is expected over here, when the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy come together. Notwithstanding the fact that the two leaders have also enjoyed a close personal relationship in the first tenure of President Trump that we've seen. Let's quickly, in fact, take this across to our guests who are...
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1, on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Joining us is Anthony Razzulli, who's an associate partner of the Albright Stonebridge Group South Asia practice and former U.S. diplomat who's most recently served as director for India in the Biden White House. We have Ray Locker, who's a journalist and author, joining us. Arun K. Sharma is a senior associate of CSIS and a former chief investment officer of IFC. Christopher Hale is a democratic strategist who's joining us on the show. Let me start with you first. Anthony Razzulli, what are your expectations from this trip? It's, of course, a one-day visit. Are we going to see any big-ticket announcements this time round, or do you think it's just going to be an official handshake to set the ball rolling? How are you looking at this visit?
Good morning to my fellow guests. Thanks very much for the invitation. Looks beautiful where you are. I wish I was with you. I'm optimistic about the visit of Prime Minister Modi to President Trump. It is, like you said, an official visit, a working visit. But nevertheless, information about the visit has been kind of kept closely held by both sides, which tells me that there may be a negotiation at play. The president has put some markers out regarding tariffs, of course. He hasn't been overly specific about India. It's been more of a global pitch that he's been making. But of course, they have the large trade deficit between the two countries. The U.S. is India's surplus with the United States, and some immigration issues that are certainly out there that potentially impact India quite substantially. But nevertheless, the partnership between the two seems quite real, the respect and friendship between them. So more likely than not, I think the convergence around issues in the Indo-Pacific and in the Indian Ocean, vis-a-vis China in particular, will probably predominate, and I expect the visit will have some good outcomes. But a little early to tell. There are some potential hurdles along the way.
Okay, let me bring in Ray Locker as well. Ray Locker, your views on this. Do you think that, of course, while there are hurdles, there are irritants, the larger, factors that bring U.S. and India together, the fact that we are the world's, largest and oldest democracy, the fact that there is, from a strategic perspective, a convergence when it comes to China on multiple fronts, and, of course, that is really going to be the binding force. And, of course, the fact that in terms of people-to-people interaction, you have a huge Indian workforce, who are, of course, powering the biggest of the technology companies here in the United States. So in that sense, are you looking at the hurdles which will gain prominence in this visit, or the positives and the common ground that the two countries share?
I think the U.S.-India relationship supersedes any president because it's only going to get bigger and bigger. India keeps growing, its economy keeps growing and getting stronger, and the United States, regardless of who the president is, recognizes that. That said, Donald Trump is a very unpredictable person. His tariffs can cut multiple ways. We just had not a good inflation number come out today, higher than 3% year to year from January to January. So there's a lot of things that are going on that could, affect tomorrow's major meeting. But in the end, I think the relationship with the two countries overrides anything having to do with Trump.
Right. Arun Sharma, let me get you in on that. When it comes to tariffs, a lot of stuff is said during a political campaign. But when it comes to actually implementing on ground, it's a completely different thing. And we've seen what's happened in the case of Canada and Mexico. It was announced that it was held back for a month. In the case of India and BRICS, there were a lot of statements that were made. But at the moment, at least nothing being announced. India's, even in the budget, made some concessions to U.S. manufacturers. Do you think that's going to be enough? Or is there something more that the United States is going to seek from India?
Thank you first for the opportunity, and really appreciate being here with my co-panelists. A couple of comments here. One, I think the understanding on both sides is transcending several administrations, and it's also a very well-prepared visit. I think there have been visits by the Honorable Foreign Minister here around the time of the inauguration, and a lot of these issues that are going to be discussed tomorrow, I think, have been very well prepared. That's the first point. Second point is that there is already was anticipation in the Indian government on the approach of the Trump administration, which is certainly reflected both in the sort of promptness with which Prime Minister Modi sort of accepted this invitation, and it also reflects a similar, I would say, priority on the US-India relationship, because PM Modi is now, I think, just the third or the fourth global leader to meet President Trump so early in his administration. I think that's a very important signal of the importance of this relationship to both the countries. That's the second point. The third point I wanted to make very quickly is that there's a tremendous opportunity that I don't think any country, both countries, don't want to lose because of a tariff sort of issue as such, because the amount of exports that the United States can make to India, especially for the manufacturing sector, the capital goods, the intermediate goods, the services that are possible, I don't think anybody wants to jeopardize that with a major trade war. So I think there's a great opportunity here to expand rather than contract trade and investment, and I think the leaders will be focusing on that. Thank you.
All right, interesting there. And let me bring in Christopher Hale as well. Christopher, what do you think about initiatives that have, begun in the Biden regime, ICET, for instance, and its continuance? Because, these emerging technologies are, of course, very, very critical. And, for both countries in that sense, cooperation, is that the way forward? And do you see, such programs, going forward in a bipartisan manner?
It really depends on who's running the White House at this point. I mean, so I think the big thing that we have to understand about Donald Trump is there's Donald Trump 1.0 and Donald Trump 2.0. Obviously, Donald Trump's first administration, he did get along well with Prime Minister Modi in India, and the tariffs were just, in the end of the day, threats. There were a few tariffs on China, but also the Biden administration continued those as well. But that being said, I think that, as my previous contributor said, is that Donald Trump is very unpredictable. I will note this: he tends to be more cordial in the flesh than when he's online. So I think in the flesh, everything will look nice and kind and gratuitous. But I think when Prime Minister Modi goes back home, we'll see what actually happens. I do think it's really interesting to note, we've been talking about the primacy of the India-American relationship. It is noteworthy that just 3 months ago, Prime Minister Modi was here in New York. I believe he spoke with both Harris and Donald Trump during his visits to New York in September. So it's remarkable to see the supremacy of a relationship. And I do think this continues on and continues to grow going forward. That being said, if there is any fork in the road, it is Trump himself. His obsession with tariffs over and above the expertise of even those in his own party is always at play. That being said, I think today's inflation numbers over 3%. Donald Trump does focus on one thing, and that is the message of Wall Street. Wall Street does not like tariffs. They obviously do not like anything that adds to the inflation. Everyone agrees that tariffs will increase the prices here in the United States. So I do think that for Donald Trump's own benefit, and for the benefit of the Indian-American relationship, we will see cooperation going forward, less tariffs, more cooperation. But look, any Democrat who thinks he knows about Donald Trump has been wrong time and again over the past decade, so it could be wrong again here.
Right. Let me bring in Auntie Rizuli on that point. Auntie Rizuli, one of the interesting points that we've seen, coming from India's side, and, there's been a visit to a reactor just before the Prime Minister has come into the United States. He's, in fact, just flown out of France. And one of the points was, this experimental reactor. India has, of course, expressed its own intent to change the legal, structures that exist over there, and has also announced initiatives for setting up smaller civilian nuclear plants. Do you think the Indo-US nuclear deal, which many see as a pivotal moment in 2008, but could not be implemented due to multiple factors, do you see some movement going forward with the kind of positions that are now being taken by India? Auntie Rizuli.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I think nuclear is one of those areas in which the Trump administration could make progress, building on progress that had been made late in the Biden administration. I completely agree. I mean, we had never realized the full potential of the civil nuclear deal, at least with regard to civil nuclear commerce between the two countries. Of course, the strategic benefit of the deal was immense, but largely because of the liability law in India that was passed, I believe, in 2010. We never saw that India-U.S. trade in civil nuclear technology grow. So, however, now, you saw the Biden administration at the very end remove 3 Indian nuclear organizations from the entity list, which essentially had prohibited trade with Indira Gandhi Atomic Research Center, BARC, and IREL. And now there is an opportunity. Now you saw a response to that, at least that's how I interpreted it, in the budget, in which the Indian government stated that it would amend the liability law, something that had for many years they had been saying didn't need to be done. So that's notable. And of course, in the context of AI and other energy pressures, that could be a very important area of cooperation that could actually widen the parameters of the civil nuclear deal and even start to encompass some of strategic security areas that the two countries had really not touched so much. I'll just use a couple more seconds just to build on comments from one of the other panelists. Looking back at Trump 1.0 versus 2.0, Trump 1.0 did do a couple of important things on strategic trade, even as tariff pressures existed, and we saw Trump extend strategic trade authorization to Tier 1 status to India, which was hugely significant in terms of strategic technology trade. Other steps were taking around UAVs that made possible sales of UAVs under the Biden administration. There's a upward continuity in the relationship that I hope prevails despite real risks, political risks to Modi and economic risks around tariffs and potentially immigration.
Right. Let me bring in Ray on those points. In fact, Ray, 2 very important points that were made there by Anthony. One is, of course, on the civil nuclear deal being this huge unexplored area which could potentially change now. And also, remember that there's been an AI conference just now in France. Vice President Vance was there as well, and Prime Minister Modi attended that. Are we looking at AI as an area where internationally there can be more cooperation? Because DeepSeek's being this huge aha moment. Are we looking at more competition? Are we looking at more collaboration in that sense? Right.
Well, I think compared to China with DeepSeek, I mean, the other countries need to cooperate more because now they have a major rival out there. And I'm not an expert in AI. I use it infrequently, but I know that it's more and more important. And the DeepSeek revelations really threw a scare in the market. You saw a lot of shares in companies like NVIDIA start to tank after DeepSeek came out and said, look what we can do for much less money. So if you're a competitor with DeepSeek, you have to find alliances where you can. And I would imagine U.S. and Indian companies will do that.
Right. That's, of course, a very interesting perspective there as well. Let me bring in Arun Sharma on another important point. Arun Sharma, we've seen how in the previous regime, there's been a lot of back and forth and some amount of embarrassment in relation to the entire issues, which come out of Khalistani separatism and those who are, in fact, actors here in U.S. soil. Of course, it's been a much bigger issue with Canada, with the whole issue snowballing, diplomatically speaking. A completely different context over here with this individual called Vikas Yadav, who's, of course, now in custody. But the larger question is, how do we see this particular issue being dealt with by the Trump administration? Will we be seeing a different approach here as well? Arun Sharma.
So Mr. Trump and his administration have really not come out publicly with any specific position on the immigration issue. Of course, the Biden administration, there was some amount of collaboration and indeed support for Canada, if not explicit, certainly tacit. And that was a cause for worry for India. But we've seen no sign yet of this particular issue. I think the immigration issue is really more around the topic that is core to the Trump campaign and now to the Trump administration in terms of deportation of illegal immigrants. And I think it's an important issue for both countries because there is certainly a huge contribution that legal Indian immigration has made to this country. And the Trump administration is looking for more. Actually, Mr. Trump has gone on record saying, with the AI and all the other things that the country is planning, they need a lot more skilled people inside the United States. And that, is running quite, I would say, to the interest of India, because India doesn't want to send illegals. Illegals come because on their own, and because of the fact that there are a lot of these agencies that need to be clamped down more, and hopefully that will happen. But it's the legal immigration that should be the focus of the Prime Minister. So if I was in that meeting tomorrow, I would certainly say, listen, if we want to collaborate, we have what you need. We have more engineers skilled in AI and potentially skilled in AI than the entire Europe and the United States combined. And that's what several people at the Paris conference also said. So I think from an immigration perspective, these issues, I would say, would not be the primary ones on the agenda. It will be more the issues around how we handle, particularly from a public opinion perspective, on how the illegal immigrants are deported and their treatment and so on. I think that's a major political challenge that Prime Minister Modi has in facing his political constituencies back home, and managing that, and at the same time having the path to legal immigration clearer and smoother and hopefully more scalable is going to be, I think, the more important topic tomorrow.
All right. Before I go across to Christopher, I'd actually like Anthony to answer that, because, Anthony, there are 2 points over there. One is legal immigration, the other is illegal immigration. Now, the government of India's position on illegal immigration is very, very clear. They say that no country can perhaps, allow for that. India, too, is a victim of illegal immigration. But the point that, has the government, a little bit on the mat is the fact that you have the opposition up in arms. They've raised it in the parliament, particularly the optics of bringing back, illegals in a military aircraft, handcuffed, even women, etc., amongst those who are, kept or curtailed in that sense. There are very many issues arising out of that. That's going to be a very difficult one because of the positions that President Trump has taken domestically. Or do you see both sides being able to reach some kind of a mutual agreement on that front as well? Anthony?
I think there's scope for a mutual agreement, but it's not easy. The repatriations are something that, candidly, India had not been too helpful with in the past. Previous administrations perhaps hadn't pushed them hard enough on that. So I think there is going to be more cooperation. But if I were, as I said, in the meeting tomorrow and I were India, I would insist on the treatment of my nationals, Indian nationals, with dignity and respect, even those who have entered the United States illegally. And I suspect that point will be made. And I think it's politically important for the Prime Minister, because few leaders can really withstand that kind of treatment of their co-nationals. That said, whether or not legal immigration is to be supported in the future, many of us probably have views, and I would be supportive. But I don't know at this point in time whether or not the Trump administration across the board shares that view. I think there is a sense that there are different camps ideologically within the administration who feel perhaps differently about this question and may view the issue more from a nativist or cultural perspective versus an economic perspective. But India has its concerns around immigration too, a very long backlog for non-immigrant visa applications, for example. The H1B program could be reformed to perhaps expand even as you change the eligibility. So I think there's scope for a deal, quote unquote, around immigration, but it is a tricky issue and it has the potential to cut politically in both countries.
Right. But Christopher, do you agree with that? Because India's position is that, there were deportations earlier as well, but they didn't happen in this sort of, with this so much of song and dance of coming in a military aircraft. They were quietly deported in civilian aircraft, and it's happened in the previous regimes as well. This changed, approach to how they are deported, the manner in which it all happens on ground. Do you see all of this really changing, Christopher?
It's remarkable. I think that what's interesting about the deportations that happened about a week ago that caught so much tension and flare up in India, it didn't really make an impact in American media as much as the deportations to our neighbors across the border in Mexico and, of course, in Latin America. I think what's remarkable about it is, I think President Trump sees in Latin American leaders, and particularly the president of Mexico, adversaries for sure. And so there is a bit of in-your-face mentality given to it. But obviously, India and Modi are friends. And so I think the one-size-fits-all approach of aggressive tactics on deportations, it's coming to bite President Trump in the back a bit. So I do think that with intervention from Modi, this will change. I think that Trump has a clear sense of who his friends and who his foes are, and Prime Minister Modi in India are his friends. And so I do think that will change. One final thing I want to add, I think the H1B issue is actually quite more salient, and I think a big issue at play. Once again, there's two Trumps. There's MAGA Trump, and that is the original Trump. And then there's this Silicon Valley Trump, which is Elon Musk represents. Silicon Valley Trump, Elon Musk Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy Trump wants an expansion of H1B. But that's not who brought Trump to the dance. MAGA Trump, America First Trump, has intense skepticism on the H-1B visa. And I think that what's going to be interesting is see who Trump decides to go with on this big fight. The one who brought him to the dance, or the one who took him over to the finish line here in 2024. I think that will be the big issue at play in the coming months.
Right. Let me bring in Ray on that. Ray, it's a tough one. There's no clarity on which way really the whole thing will proceed in. But the very fact that within the ruling party itself, there are multiple views being expressed. And, Elon Musk, one of those who's very strongly standing by the H-1B visa. And ultimately, it is some of the biggest technology companies over here who actually require, more H-1B visas and more workers from India. So how are we going to look at all of that playing out?
Well, I think you're in a race against time, right? I mean, people are getting tired of Musk's act. His approval ratings are going down. People are starting to look at who elected him, who is this Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, these are not people that anybody really knows or what they're doing. They're running around government agencies. They're cutting off funding. They are a mini government unto itself. And I think as the longer they do that, the more people's patience are going to run out on Musk and his antics. Then you put that against the MAGA base. Those people don't really want more immigrants. They don't care where they are, where they're coming from, or what they're doing. And you saw that with the reaction with the H-1B controversy in December, where Trump finally sided with Musk. How that plays out, I don't know. But the force behind Trump really comes from his base. And are they going to be, overtaken by Musk and company? I kind of doubt it. And I think maybe they would have some allies on the left. They don't like Musk either because the guy is running wild. He's unelected. He has conflicts of interest out the wazoo. He's basically taking over the Oval Office. So if you're putting your chips on Elon Musk, I think it's a big mistake.
All right. Let me bring in Arun Sharma on a slightly different note. Arun Sharma, one of the points that many are looking at, of course, apart from the entire strategic partnership and the larger cooperation between two countries, is also the entire issue of defense procurements. Now, U.S. has made absolutely no bones about the fact that they want India to be a bigger purchaser of military hardware. India has, of course, already bought several such, important military hardware from the United States. But do you look at this aspect of it or any big-ticket announcement on that front being, in fact, formally announced as far as this visit is concerned, Arun?
Firstly, there are two parts to this question. I think the first, the most strategic part, I think the position of Prime Minister Modi and India, which has really been consistent for decades now, which is that, we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We need to diversify our source of defense supplies in as many sort of directions as possible. So we have supplies from Russia, from France, from the UK, and from Czech Republic and multiple other suppliers in addition to the United States. I don't believe that is going to change in any material way. That's the first point. I think the fact that more and more strategic tiering of India as a buyer of United States equipment, including defense, I think that certainly is going to help in the defense procurement question, because then there are things that India will prioritize for procuring from the United States, which are now more available, because there were things, and for years there has been this issue that, yes, the US wants to sell more, but it won't sell the type of things that India really wants it to sell because of these strategic considerations. So I think that dialogue is going to become a little bit easier as far as the transaction being announced today, that's something that I won't know about, because any such discussion has been kept very closely under the wraps, if there is any. So I won't really have any insight on something that's been cooking, and nothing has come out really in the media on any imminent kind of specific transaction. As you know, defense transactions take a long time to negotiate. They have a number of other collateral agreements that are associated with them. So I would be surprised if something major is announced on a specific defense procurement sort of transaction tomorrow. That would be my view.
Right. Right. Christopher, also on this, Christopher, the most important aspect that, India has been, talking about is that, A, the transfer of technology, and B, the fact that, very often it's not the latest technology that India, if it's spending so much money, is necessarily getting. And those have been some of the concerns that have been expressed from India's side, although a lot of, military hardware will see 17J, several such, aircraft and other equipment that India has typically bought from the US over the last decade and a half and continues to do so. But there are some challenges on that front from India's perspective as well. How do you see that being sorted out, Christopher?
I think that the reality of it is I don't think it'll be sorted out in this meeting, in this interaction. But I do think by Prime Minister Modi just even showing face, what he's so smart about, what Prime Minister Modi is so smart about, and I think his compatriots around the world could learn from, is showing grace, and showing up means a lot to this president. And so, Prime Minister Modi didn't come here and he didn't get a state visit. There's not a state dinner out there for him. They're not bringing out the red rug for him, but he showed up anyway. And I think that's really important for this administration. Is as much as MAGA and America First is a movement, the titular head and the actual head of this movement is in fact Donald Trump. And showing grace and showing face with Donald Trump is a great way to get what you want. So the Indian people have an ambassador for the population who understands that, and I think that Prime Minister Modi, more than any other leader in this world, understands showing up and showing grace matters to Donald Trump. So I think on the list of what Prime Minister Modi wants, he'll get a lot more than other leaders across this world, simply because he understands how politics work, and more importantly, he understands how Donald Trump works.
All right. All right. Adri Ranzuli, Ray Locker, Arun K. Sharma, as well as Christopher Hale, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. A very, very interesting set of expectations from both sides. Whether, of course, this will be a visit about big ticket announcements, or will it just be a routine handshake to set the ball rolling on a numerous set of discussions on several perplexing and challenging issues? All of that, of course, we'll only get to know when the bilateral meeting takes place tomorrow and the formal announcements are made later in the evening tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us on this special edition of the NewsHour Agenda.